Hey guys, this is Miss Whitfield. It feels kind of embarrassing to be doing a video, so I'm going to keep my face out of it to hopefully make it a little bit less embarrassing. I hope that you guys are all doing well and staying safe. And like I've kind of said before, I'm just sorry that our year is kind of ending on this weird note, but since this packet that you guys have now does contain new stuff, I wanted to be able to do my part a little bit with the teaching. So we're looking at, if you have the phase 2 packet, specifically days 4, 5, and 6, I thought a little bit of instruction might be helpful. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through just one example problem together. And the example problem that I made up, I actually pulled it from the notes packet you guys already had from before we left. We'll be able to do one of each kind of problem like you'll see in your Norfolk packet here. So days 4, 5, and 6 of the Learning in Place packet is kind of all about the same thing. It's about a normal distribution or a bell curve. It's called a bell curve because you can kind of see the shape of it. So when we're doing these word problems, as soon as you see the words normal distribution, that's just your hint. Oh, hey, when I set it up, I know that I get to use this curve and that I get to use all these percentages in there. And we can kind of talk about what that means, but this is something that if you were taking the SOL, these numbers are not on your formula sheet. So you would have to memorize 34, 13.5, 2, and 0.5. If you've taken psychology, you might have used a bell curve like this and used slightly different numbers in here. But that's what the Norfolk packet has, so that's what we're going to do. So for an actual problem for us to look at, I got it here. So normal distribution is the same thing as a bell curve. So both of those mean the same thing. All right, so my problem here says that the weights of 50 football players are normally distributed. So as soon as I'm seeing normally distributed, that's my hint that I'm gonna get to set it up with the bell curve with those percentages we just looked at. With a mean of 178 pounds, and a standard deviation of 8 pounds. So when you're asked to draw the graph for this, or if you have any problem in your packet, like on day, I think it's on day 5. So even day 5 in your packet, it doesn't ask you to draw the graph, but for you to be able to answer these questions, I would highly encourage you to draw the graph. Okay, so if we're drawing our graph here, I'm gonna go ahead and draw my little bell. If you've been in my class all year, you know that I can't really draw, but I do the best that I can. All right, the number that always goes on your center line is the mean. So the number that they gave me for the mean is right here. So the mean always goes in the middle. Maybe I'll just add a little note there. And then those other numbers they were getting, we're gonna go 3 standard deviations up from the mean. So it told me that my standard deviation was 8 pounds. So from the mean, if I go up 1 standard deviation, that means I'm supposed to do 178 plus 8. That's how I'm going to get this number. So 178 plus 8 will give me 186. And I'm just going to keep repeating that. So if I wanted to go up another standard deviation, I'm going to add 8 again. And then to get this last little number, I'll add 8 one more time. So that takes me one direction. To get my lines going the other way, if I want to go down a standard deviation instead of adding that standard deviation of 8, now I'm going to get to subtract it. So I got 170 minus 8 again. I miss y'all being my little mental math people. Minus 8 again. Okay, so now that I have these are the weights of the football players. So the mean was this, and then here are kind of my other important values. When I do these personally, I like to go ahead and fill in all those percentages that I'm gonna have to memorize, just because before you have them memorized, it's kind of hard to get it done. What they tell us to use here too, and then 0.5. So you don't have to put the percentages in, but I think it'll make it easier when we go to actually use it. All right, first question here. What percent of the players weigh between 178 pounds, and 194 pounds. So between 178 and 194. Your packet actually kind of showed I thought, a good job of showing where they were getting their numbers from. So from between 178 and 194, I'm looking at these two chunks here. What I'm supposed to do is add up those two percentage chunks. So if I want to know what percent of players weigh between these two lines, I'm adding these two little chunks here. So for us, that was 34% plus 13.5%, which gives me 47.5%. That's all I'm doing. All right, let's see about the other one here. Another way that they might ask the question is, this one says, what is the probability? The probability wants you to give the same number. We're just gonna add up whatever the appropriate percent chunks are here from our bell curve to answer their question. So what is the probability that a player weighs at least 170 pounds? So that's kind of where I have to use some math sense and know what the word at least means. If I have to be at least 16 to drive a car, I know that I have to be 16 or more. So if I want to weigh at least 170 pounds, all right, well, here's 170. At least means 170 or more. So any of these people, if I weigh 186 pounds, yes, I weighed at least 170. If I weighed 202 pounds, yes, I do weigh at least the 170 that I'm supposed to be looking at. So I'm going to add up all of these chunks here. So I got 34, 34, 13.5, 2. And you can flex your mental math skills, or I took this calculator from school. Hey. All right, so 34 plus 34 plus 13.5 plus 0.5. But, you know, Desmos work just fine. So right here, I got my little percent, 84. And that's my answer. So that is the probability that a football player, is going to weigh at least 170 pounds. The last kind of question that I wanted to kind of leave you guys with is this one here. So this last question, it doesn't ask me what percentage or what probability. It asks me literally how many players. So that's a different kind of question. How many players weigh less than 170? So what you need to know is that these percentages in here have nothing to do with like an actual number of people. Like this 34% doesn't necessarily represent 34 players. For me to be able to figure out how many players, specific people, weigh less than 170, in my original problem, I would have to know, okay, like how many football players were included in this data here. So if your question does not tell you how many people were actually included to make this up, you can't answer a question like part D. But our question, of course, does. It tells me that this chart here is representing the weights of 50 football players, so I know how many. Okay, but we're still going to look at our percents. So if I want to know how many players weigh less than 170, I have two steps here. My first step is, well, what percentage, because that's kind of all I have to work with here right now. What percentage of players weigh less than 170? So back to kind of using that number sense. If I'm interested in less than 170, okay, here's 170. Less than means I could weigh 162 pounds, 154, etc. So I'm looking at all of these chunks. So for my percentage, these are my three chunks I'm adding up. So that's 13.5 plus 2 plus 0.5. So what's that? 16%. So for part one of my question, just kind of part one of my work really, 16% of my players weigh less than 170. But that wasn't the question. I wanted to know literally how many players weigh less than 170. So what I actually need to find is what is 16% of my 50 football players. So I had used the percentage. I used my little bell curve to figure that out. This 50 that I got right here is because the original problem told me that this data here was representing the weights of 50 football players. So I didn't make that up. That was given to me. I don't know if you guys remember the math for doing this. There's some different ways you could do it. In my opinion, I kind of like to just rewrite the percentage as a decimal. So I'm going to do 0.16 times 50, and I will cheat. Don't mind if I do. 0.16 times 50, and I got 8. So that means 8 players. And I think that's kind of it. So let me look at your packet real quick before I cut it off. I will say the only other weird thing in here, day 6 of the packet, it's asking you to like draw the graphs, but you can either freehand it like I did on mine, or if you want to work with a curve they already drew. Day 6 has 4 problems. It's just that all 4 of the graphs are back here. So if you wanted to use a pre-sketched curve, I would just number them 1, 2, 3, 4. Or like I said, you're welcome to do it by hand here. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you have a great spring break. I'm sure it's not all that you thought it was going to be. I know it's not for, us and our family, but stay safe and please let me know if there's anything that you need.